All right, I'm going to call the meeting to order of the Provo Municipal Council's work session, 1 p.m. Tuesday, August 1st, 2023. We have our Executive Director, Justin Harrison, Councillor Dave Shipley, Councillor Patrice McKay, Councillor Rachel Whipple, Councillor Shannon Ellsworth, Councillor Bill Fillmore, and we have George Hanley on the phone, Louise Parker, and we'll get started. Although this is a public meeting, only the presenters and those invited by the council may speak or ask questions, unless otherwise invited by the chair. Please wait to speak until called on by the council chair. When speaking, please be sure to use a microphone so that the record is clear and those attending virtually can hear you. Please also be sure to limit side conversations as they distract the audio recording. If you need to have a side conversation, please step out of the work meeting room. Our first item will be discussion regarding tiered water prices. And they'll be presented by Abby McAfee, our council intern, as well as Dave Decker, our public works director.
Okay. Hello. Is this on?
Yeah, it's on.
It's on. Okay.
Good.
Okay. So today we wanted to bring back tiered water rates. I think the last time we really discussed with the city council was in 2019. And so it's been a while since this has been brought up. And I think in March of 2023, Councillor Dave Shipley requested to bring this item back. And so that's what we're here for. So I'm here to remind people of what tiered water rates are, the different structures there are, the advantages and disadvantages to it, as well as examples of what other cities are doing in Utah and in the Intermountain West. And it is important to mention that Provo does have a tiered water rate structure right now, but it's only 2 tiers and doesn't have as much of like an aggressive price difference between the different tiers. So today my presentation will focus primarily more on tiered structures that have multiple tiers, like at least 4 or 5, and have aggressive price drops between the different tiers. Oh, and this is also
goal to review the water rates. So
You're good.
So tiered water pricing or tiered water rates, it means that it's a usage-based rate. So the more water someone might use, the more the price increases. And it's all to focus on it, like tiered water pricing to help increase water conservation. There's different types of tiered water structures. The one that we see the most is uniform rates, where it's just one price no matter how much water you use. A very popular one that we see a lot is increasing block rates. So that means if you use between 0 and 5,000 gallons of water per month, it will be this price. And then if you use between 5,000 and 10,000 gallons per month, it will be an even more expensive price. And it goes up from there. And then seasonal
is when the tiers change depending on the season. And then water budget based is when like households are given a certain amount of water to use per month. And if they exceed that budget by 101% or 150%, then the price continues to increase. And it's also important to note that a lot of cities have mixed different types of tier structures. They may use one, or they may use increasing block rates and water budget base rates as well.
Hey, Abby,
yeah.
Wait just a second because the sound is being weird and we're not sure why. Again.
The sound was better just in the last bit she was speaking, but it was very muffled earlier.
Okay. Okay.
Go ahead.
Keep going now.
Okay. Also, so next part of this is, sorry, this is not working very well.
Sorry.
No, you're good.
Okay, we got it.
So I wanted to talk about the advantages of tiered water pricing. To start off, it's a lot of like academic studies have claimed that tiered water pricing is one of the best tools that you can use for water conservation. it really motivates citizens to like be careful with their water use, just because prices do get more expensive the more water they use. There's not really any harsh enforcement measures because the price already does that for you. It also can support irrigation needs while saving water, and it reduces water wastage and can generate more revenue. There were some studies that I found that said that for every 10% increase of the price, cities can expect 6.5% increase in water, like conserved water. So there's that. And then, sorry, this is
Sorry.
There are some disadvantages to tiered water pricing, though. It can be really difficult to convince citizens about it. Also, water bills may increase significantly, which can be a shock to a lot of people and have negative consequences for a lot of different people. There can also be a loss of revenue. I think Ogden saw like a $600,000 loss of revenue because they tried tiered water rates. There's also risk of legal ramifications. In California, there was a lawsuit because the tiered water rates weren't matching up with the actual cost of service for providing that water. But then they had to go back and evaluate that and fix it. And then it can be inequitable to citizens as well. But all of this can be prevented with correct pricing. A lot of the studies that I looked at, they wanted to make sure tiered water pricing could be economically efficient, can conserve water, and can also be equal to all people who are under tiered water pricing. And they all said that these things, those three things can be achieved if you have the right design and the right pricing for your city and with all the correct tiers. So I have a few examples. This is Orem, Utah. You can see on one side, that's like the example of their tiered rate that they have right now. They've consulted with the American Water Works Association to come up with these tiered rates. They have a goal to save 7.3 billion gallons of water by 2030. And they also, you can see they have like reasonable jumps between the prices between the tiers. So the next one is Saratoga Springs. And this example actually comes from one, yeah, sorry.
Sorry, Abby, can you just give us context for our pricing? Just
Yes.
kind of have an idea of where we're at relative to this.
So Provo has two rate structures for the seasons. For the winter, tier 1, I think, is $1.06.
Okay.
And then the next tier is $1.16. And then the summer it increases, I think it was like $1.64 for the first tier, and then it jumps to $1.75 for the second tier. I could be a little off on that.
So those are the 22.
That's.
Oh, 22?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. Would you
Good.
mind sharing?
The 24 rate that will go into effect September 1st. The winter first tier is $1.17,
Okay,
and the summer first tier is $1.90.
okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
So Saratoga Springs, this example came from one of the studies. They looked at Saratoga Springs' success with water conservation through tiered pricing, and it proved to be really successful. As you can see, they have it, their tiered structure is a little different, where it's like a water-based budget, so each individual household has a certain amount of water they can use each month, and then if they go above that like budget, then the price increases. And so you can see that in the chart on the side. They've also separated culinary water and irrigation water. So that kind of takes into account for what kinds of water people are using and what they're using their water for. And then they saw between a 10% and 22% increase in water conservation. And then the last example I have is Irvine, California. It's the same thing. They have monthly allotments, so they have a water-based budget rate. And since the 1990s, when it was implemented, they've seen like a 61% decrease in water. And then also in my memo, I have other examples referenced as well. And so you're welcome to go back and review those. Along with that, these are just a few of the cities in Utah that have tiered water rates with multiple tiers and price increases. And so it might help to look at those cities to see what Provo can do to implement tiered water pricing if that's desired. But overall, tiered pricing correlates with water lower water application rates. And if the priority for Provo City is to continue to increase water conservation, then tiered water pricing can be a really good tool to accomplish that. So that's my presentation.
Thanks, Abby. I'd like to recognize that the mayor has joined us and Isaac Paxton.
Thank you for the opportunity to meet with the council today on tiered water rates. We were asked to, by council staff, we were asked to do a quick review of previous presentations and information that have been given to the council. And we're gonna show a couple of slides that come from a presentation. We actually talked with the council a couple of times, 2019 and then also in 2020. There were at least 2 presentations that we did on tiered water rates. We're not going to show the entire presentation. We picked critical slides that we felt like we wanted to review with the council. We also gave the council both electronically, and we have hard copies available for a technical memorandum that was prepared by Bowen and Collins. If you have not reviewed that, I would encourage you to look at it. The first 12 or 13 pages is the write-up, and then there's about 20 pages after that that include data and some information as far as their findings with actual consumption information. But I wanted to start and outline a couple of things. When we did the presentation previously for the council, we identified with the council, especially in the first presentation, we talked about what the objectives of the city are. And this page right here is a summary. It's actually included in the Bowen and Collins memorandum on page 1, and identifies many of the goals that the city set, not just staff, not administration, but the council participated in those goals. And you can see some of those and the council staff that did the presentation. We talked a little bit about revenue. And one of the things that we were concerned about was being basically neutral, revenue neutral. There's some legal issues that we talked about with the council about that have been touched on, briefly. We also talked about some other rates, and I'll cover those in just a minute here, as far as not just water rates, but there's other rates that were considered by the council at the time. So these are exact copies of the slide that we provided to the city council previously. And you can see we talk about some recommendations, and just a quick review. In 2016, the state legislature passed a law that requires every city above a certain number of water users, and I think it's at 3,000 water users, they have to have a tiered water rate system. And Provo City does have a tiered water rate system. They didn't define exactly what it had to look like, how many tiers, what the quantities were. They just said every city above that quantity needs a tiered water rate system. We did have a little bit of a lag. You'll notice we didn't have a conversation with the council until 2019. We approached the state officials that regulate this, and we explained some of the changes that were happening with our billing system. And they gave us a little bit of leeway as far as meeting that. And so that's the reason for some of the difference in the time period. And they were very good to work with. Provo City is meeting some of the conservation goals. We talked with the council about that. And I'll mention again at the end of the presentation, we'll talk about conservation and conservation goals. So let me get into some of the specifics. And Jimmy mentioned this earlier. This is a little bit dated. You can see in the lower right-hand corner, but this is an exact copy of what was given to the council. This was adopted by the council in 21, I believe it is. And it was part of the recommendation that came from city staff and from Bowen and Collins. And historically, the city has had a summer and a winter rate for some reason. I mean, that's a little bit odd for a city to have that. It's not completely unheard of, but historically, the city has for a long time has had a summer and a winter water rate. So we specifically talked with the council, did they want a tiered system that had a winter and a summer component? And the answer was yes at that time. So we built tiered systems into both categories, a summer and a winter rate. Let me point out the residential summer rates, because there was a question about Orem. We oftentimes get compared to Orem City for various reasons. And it's interesting when you look at our summer tiered rates, we actually sit higher, even though they have a 4-tier system in Orem. They have a little bit more condensed quantity of water within their tiers. But even so, our tiers, our bottom tier is above the highest tier in Orem City. And I think that's an important note to make. Even though we don't match exactly what other cities are doing, we were very careful in looking at the pricing, the legal aspects, what exactly we wanted to recommend to the council. So I think I'm trying to help the council exercise some caution in what was done. I also picked one slide out to show the council. This is a letter that I wrote to a resident, and I actually used this paragraph. And I read this paragraph to the city council back in 2019, 2020. And I'm gonna read it again because I think it largely illustrates maybe my, I guess I'll say it's my personal philosophy, but in working with the administration and with the council, I think it largely tells our approach about tiered water rates. So this particular sentence, and it's a long email, but I just picked out one paragraph. It says, I believe most residents, when properly educated on a citywide or regional concern, will respond in a positive way without forcing them to take certain actions. Most will be responsible for their own actions and will help. Not every resident will respond, and it won't always work or be in the exact manner or quantity that a staff member or an elected official will hope for. However, I think most residents will try very hard when asked and given the latitude to be responsible for their own actions. I believe most people appreciate this approach over a strong arm or scare tactic approach. And I sent this out a couple of times to residents, and it's been interesting. I think most have responded in a very positive way. Now, I have had some people come back and say, tiered water rates, are they really a scare tactic? Is a strong arm approach? And I have to tell you, state officials that regulate this particular legislation, they will tell you that is the intent. Council staff that showed the example out of Irvine, California, it's a very good example of some concerns that I have where the state of Utah is headed. If you noticed in their pricing, our highest tier was in the $6 or $8 per 1,000 gallons. And there's significant concerns about where this leads. So let me make 2 points here to end this presentation. So the first point that I'm trying to make is we have taken a little bit different approach with our residents. We've tried to educate them. We haven't taken the scare tactic. We haven't been really aggressive with the pricing. And the question always comes back, well, what are the results? And for the next couple of slides, here's the results of the approach that we've taken with residents. So this came out, Fox News actually had a story relative to 3 other water agents, Salt Lake City, Washington County Water, and also Jordan Valley Water Conservancy District, which is located in Salt Lake County. And they showed some data from them. And so we went to the reporter, we asked what data they were collecting, and we put Provo City next to the 3 that they had compared in this particular story. You'll notice in Provo, we're not quite at the same level that Salt Lake City is, but we're easily beating the other 2 water conservancy districts. And when you start to look at the data from residents, we actually are one of the lowest in the state still today. We have the lowest water consumption per capita amongst all the cities, the large cities. So the question becomes, are we conserving? Are we doing the right work without taking a strong arm approach? My belief is that we are. Here's a couple of other questions that sometimes get asked. What kind of percent are we, what are we conserving here? So right here, this is the revenue over the last 8 years. You can see the revenue that's coming in. Here's the percent change on that revenue. And here's the production that we have each of those years, and the decrease that we've seen as we've implemented some management tools. And I like to use the word management instead of conservation. That's really what there is a difference when we talk about water management versus water conservation. And I emphasize that a number of times with the council. I also want to point out, this is data that we collect every single month. Our water, our primary manager for our water system, Ryan York, submits this information for water production. And I need to point out some data in the next couple of slides comes from this, but I want to point out 2 months, the most recent months, right here and right here. So June of 23, July of 23. And you can look over the last 23 years in July, the number at the bottom of that column, it's the lowest number. And the one in June is the second lowest. And my point being is residents are responding. They are acting, and they're being responsible for their actions, just as I indicated. We're going to make some comparisons on a couple of other pieces of data here. So in 2021, when we've shown this previously to the council, you can see versus 2021 versus average. Here's what we were producing in those months. And you can see when the mayor first started talking about being cautious with water and talking about water management, that was in June of 21. And you can see residents responded almost immediately. You can see how many millions of gallons we were saving in those months. And over that time period, it was about 728 million gallons. In 22, you can see the trend continues, even though we're conserving water, if you want to call it that. In 21, we're actually still conserving above and beyond what we did even in 21. So let me try to make one other point that I think is a little bit more difficult, and I'm going to be pretty straightforward with the conversation about tiered water rates and water conservation. And I think this requires a little bit of a step back from the actual conversation about tiered water rates or water conservation. And I try to kind of step back from time to time and ask myself, why are we doing this? What's the push really behind water conservation? And one of the things that, as I talk with state officials and even other water agencies, one of the things that I make a point about, maybe I'll call it the weakness in the water system, is our reliance upon infrastructure that has been built largely by the Bureau of Reclamation. And let me make a point here so that you understand. So if you look at the 2 reservoirs that sit up Provo Canyon, which is largely what drives much of the conversation in Utah County, especially, and in Salt Lake County, those 2 reservoirs have a very limited capacity. Those reservoirs can hold 2 years worth of water and no more. And even after a really good water year, just like we've experienced, and we've had flooding concerns and we've had sandbags and lots of activity to prevent water flooding, at the end of the water year, we still only have 2 years worth of water in those 2 reservoirs. And so if you understand that cycle and start to think about what nature gives to us, we don't have a constant flow of water every single year. And that's really what we've built. We've built infrastructure that needs a pretty constant amount of water that comes in every single year. And not only have we built it, but we've become overly reliant on it. And we've built cities, and we've signed contracts with cities to deliver water based on water that comes out of those 2 reservoirs, knowing full well that those reservoirs will not be able to be filled every single year by the natural process. And it's interesting that we've relied and built infrastructure with that limitation, but yet we won't have the conversation about, are there alternatives? And that's exactly the conversation that we've been having with the council for the last 5, maybe 7 years, is we've been emphasizing we have another place to store water. We have storage in the ground. We have a different bank account. In fact, I oftentimes have this conversation with residents, and I say, we basically have built a bank account that has 2 years, and I like to limit it to 2 months worth of living expenses. How many people would go to a bank and open a savings account that says you can never have more than 2 months worth of living expenses in your savings account? Nobody would ever do that. And yet that's exactly what we've done with our water system. There's a limitation on how much we can save. And this year, it was a really good example where the deposits in that bank account could have continued well into July. And we could have filled Jordanelle Reservoir several times. Even if it was completely empty, we could have filled that entire bank account. And so it's important to understand in Provo, we have a different approach. We have a management approach. It's not just about conservation. And it's about understanding water and understanding what nature has given to us and taking advantage of particularly the underground storage and the ability to store it there so that when the drought certainly will return to us, but at some point, the water, the excess water that was made available to us by nature this year, it will be gone. It will be evaporated in Utah Lake and it's not available. And that's the difference. That is the primary difference in our approach. And tiered water rates and landscaping requirements and every conversation that's tied to water management goes back to that same difference in approach from Public Works.
Thanks, Dave.
Yep.
Michael made a graph of your numbers. If you can pull that up, that'd be great. Just visually helpful. Any questions for Dave? Councilor Whipple?
If we're able to save water on the consumer end, can we divert that saved water into our aquifer to help recharge?
It could. It depends on the timing of that. So let me try to answer that a little bit better. So a water treatment plant, and you know we're in the midst of trying to build a water treatment plant. If the water supply from the river was maxing out our water treatment plant, conserved water someplace else would not be able to be turned into the ground. And I will tell you, and again, I'm going to step out a long ways on a branch here that the state officials may not like, but when residents put water into the ground, they can actually influence the aquifer also. So when you talk about, can a resident either save or can they influence the aquifer? They can. They absolutely can.
When I was looking at your reports and things, one of the things, the criteria was a minimal impact to the user. And it seems that criteria would be inappropriate if what you want to do is to change the user's behavior, right? If you wanted to encourage conservation. So I was curious about that as an inclusion. Like, what did you mean by that criteria?
So I appreciate the question because there was one part of the conversation that with the council back in 19 and 20 that I think is very critical, and it's still very applicable today. One of the questions that we were asked in 19 and 20 was about other water or other rates within Public Works. And I'll just point out one, and it's the wastewater rate. Most of you are probably familiar with what has happened over the last 7 years with wastewater rates. And I apologize, we don't have a graph to show you the wastewater rates. But if I remember the numbers right, and Jimmy's probably able to pull it up right now, we're in the mid 80s for a single family residential home right now. So roughly $85 per month for an average single family home in wastewater, not in water, but in wastewater. It's one of the higher, it's not the highest, but it is certainly one of the higher bills. And we can talk a little bit about why that happened. I can review that with the council if you have some questions about why that happened. But it's primarily over financial planning relative to the wastewater system that the treatment plant that needed to be built to meet regulations. And basically just a slow response in the 80s about getting around to some good financial planning. And so we had to respond fairly quickly about 2015 to generate that much revenue to build the wastewater treatment plant. So I think back to your question, really the impact we talk about is there other impacts? Are there other utilities that are impacting our residents that we need to think about, not just water? Don't think about this. I think the emphasis at the time was, let's not just think about water in a vacuum. Let's look at the entire building.
I appreciate that. I have one more, and then I'm afraid I have to leave for a hearing. I was curious about our average residential water use and if that level seems to be appropriate to you, or if there should be further reduction in conservation, or if that could even be done and still protect the things that we value, like our tree canopy, a pleasant environment, and meeting all of those necessary household water uses.
So I think my answer to that is yes, we can probably do some more, but I think primarily it comes through education of residents so that they understand the different approach in Provo. Why is there a different approach in Provo? And frankly, I don't want to give the impression, I sometimes get this question that Provo is unique in its water rights or in its, where it sits next to the mountains. There's some advantage that we have here over other cities, particularly in Utah County. And my response to them is almost always, no, that is not the case. Other cities, I know several other cities that could take advantage of groundwater storage, much like Provo City is doing. And so I think it comes back to educating residents, in a very aggressive, mass approach, and helping people understand what's important. Why is it important? Why is the tree canopy important to us? We've talked a lot about that. And why do we encourage tree growth, and how do we support that with other kinds of vegetation? And when is it appropriate? When's the right time when we really should actually be encouraging water use? Because there are times when water use should actually be encouraged. If you understand water management and you understand the reservoir system, Utah Lake, the Great Salt Lake, there is a time when we actually should be encouraging it.
Thank you.
Councilor Fillmore.
Thanks for your presentation, Dave. It's informative as always. 2 or 3 questions. Did I understand your comment correctly that our water filtering system is kind of a pinch point that limits our ability for aquifer storage? That is, we don't necessarily have the filtering capacity to take advantage of high water years and everything into the aquifer. Did I get that right? So
let me try to explain it a little bit. So once the water treatment plant, not the wastewater, but the water treatment plant is in place, it will have a certain capacity. We're building it right now. Our goal is at 30 million gallons per day capacity. So when the river is running high and our water rights are actually potentially exceeding the capacity of the treatment plant, we could potentially maximize our water treatment plant. And let me tell you, we're working on some projects that don't necessarily require water to go through the water treatment plant. For instance, one of the projects that we did a pilot on in Riverview Park, if you know where that's at, it's right next to the Provo River. It's about, I think, 4,800 north. And we take water directly right now out of the river and we pump it into a landscape feature, and it's filtering into the aquifer. We've done that for about 3 years now. And that does not require any filtration system like you were talking about. So projects that are relatively close to the river don't necessarily have to run through the water treatment plant. But to your point, your primary question is there a maximum capacity that we potentially could use out of the river and put into the ground? And the answer is yes.
So right now, is our capacity adequate to this past year? Or
no.
Did we lose water?
We did, absolutely, because we don't have the water treatment plant is not in place. We're bidding that out and it will take a couple of years. So again, remember, this is the water treatment plant being built up on Freedom Boulevard next to the Raintree Apartments.
2200 north.
Yep.
So I guess my question is maybe more future oriented.
Yep.
When that is built, would we have had the capacity to filter all the excess flow down the river this year?
This year, our water rights actually would have exceeded the capability of the treatment plant. And it's mostly because it was a record year. I don't think most people realize that, but we had record snowfall. Nobody thought that that was even possible again in the state of Utah. And yet in many cases, we've broken records. And
I guess what I'm leading up to is, do we need to consider increasing our water treatment capacity so that we don't lose water in the future?
So what we're taking a two-prong approach into that question, because we've asked ourselves the same question. So we have tried to maximize the treatment plant capacity. We've talked about increasing that. We're planning to be able to increase that in the future. But we're leaving a little bit of wiggle room. The site is somewhat confined there. But frankly, the bigger approach to using excess water once that treatment plant is in place is actually other ASR projects. So one of the things that we've done recently within Public Works in the last couple of years is acquired access to several irrigation canals. The West Union Canal is located on what I call the Orem Bench, and it's a historic agriculture canal that largely has gone into non-use. Most people are not using it. I think there's like 28 users left on it. Very small number of users. And so we've approached that canal company about being able to use that canal. That is capable of taking water out of the river and diverting it into other ASR projects and not having to filter those projects. That canal will be able to deliver water to the Grandview and the Carterville area, everything that's located along what I'll call the northern border with Orem City.
Okay. But we presently do not have a dual water system by way of culinary versus non-culinary water, right?
Right.
So we're not we don't have the infrastructure to take advantage of gray water, is that the term of art?
Yep.
I'm sure you've thought that through in terms of the cost benefit analysis to try to retrofit the city. I think I know the answer, but I'd like to hear you express that. Because other cities do it, and it seems because maybe they have the ability to do it up front as opposed to after the fact, right?
Yep, I've been asked that question a number of times, and perhaps 50, 60 years ago, that would have been the best question to ask for Provo at that time. But given where we've built so much of our infrastructure around one water system, the price and the impact would be astronomical. It would be, I mean, we've briefly had a consultant look at it, and they can tell within, the first 30 minutes, they can tell very quickly that it doesn't make sense.
Okay.
You can imagine, let me just describe what it would take. So we would have to build a separate pipe system in every single street in the city. Every residential road would be cut and a new pipe installed with a lateral to each home. So the secondary or gray water could be delivered to every single home. Just, you can imagine the impact to every single road and just the dollar amount to have to do that.
Okay, that's what I had understood. So that ship has clearly sailed. Okay, my last question is, I made an assumption about the two or even a three-tiered system for billing rates. And my assumption has been that if your consumption exceeds the first tier, you're into the second tier.
That's correct.
That the second tier rate doesn't apply retroactively to the first tier. So you're not double punished, as it were.
You are correct.
Okay.
I will note there are some, there's probably on the lower end, but there are some cities that do take that approach. But within the state of Utah, I do not know of any city that takes that approach. So if your first tier is 10,000 gallons, you're billed at that first tier price, and it's only if you go into the second tier that you start to see the second price. But that second price does not bill to the first 10,000.
That's what I said. I mean, that would be an absolute killer. Say if you're 11,000 gallons, and all of a sudden you're whacked.
Okay. Yep.
Okay, Councilor Shipley has some questions.
Just a few things, and I know we're over time, so a couple of quick things, Dave. So I understand, you start talking about bank accounts and that's helpful to me, but I guess I don't see them as mutually exclusive at all. So I like the management approach where we say, yeah, try to make the account have more capacity, which is a huge thrust of your department. And I think we all applaud that. We want that. We want more capacity. We want this reservoir of water basically, or this bank account to be bigger and not limited. Right. But the flip side is we don't want the withdrawals to be as high either, right? And I think to your point, Provo citizens are doing a great job in reducing the level that we're withdrawing from that account. But I guess I'm not, I guess I need to carry the conversation a little bit further because I'm not convinced that tiering to 3 or 4 doesn't help with the withdrawal without being without using the stick too hard, if we can say that. So we don't need to go to California's approach and have a tier 4 that goes to $20 whatever per 1,000 gallons or whatever. But we also, there might be something we can ease into that just reminds somebody, look, oh, I went into a different tier last month and it's because I wasn't thinking about my water usage. And it's not that I don't want to think about my water usage. I've got 100 other things that I'm, going into with my life. And I think our electrical bills have kind of tried to find a sweet spot. It's hard, it's hard to find the right tier system. But I think when you do, it reminds people to use a little less when they're going into those higher tiers without being really penal, and without, swinging the bat hard. And so I guess my thought is, I'd like to carry the conversation further. I think for me personally, and I'll just say this for myself, I'm one of these citizens who's willing to do my part and to try, but I also get into life and just get going 100 miles an hour and don't think about a lot of things until it affects my pocketbook a little bit. And as soon as it affects my pocketbook a little bit, then all of a sudden it becomes top of mind and I do something about it many times. And so I think that's a relevant and efficient way to try to help. I also think there's a positive aspect of more tiers that maybe we haven't talked about today and that I'd like to carry the conversation further with. And that is for the folks who use very little, it could mean a slight decrease for those folks in cost. So if I'm a widow and I use very little money and I'm on a fixed income and I'm very careful about my water usage, broadening the tiers out could potentially lower my water bill each month. And I think that's a positive we should consider, among other things, but it might offset some of the unintended consequences that we're worried about on expanding on the tiers. So I personally am not, I guess I'm just at a point now where if there are other counselors that were willing to, I'd like to carry the conversation a little further, see how we could maybe gradually shift to something, as long as there aren't consequences that I just can't foresee at this point, and obviously I want this conversation to continue to hear from you on what those consequences might be. Right now, all I hear is we don't want to slip too far. We don't want to do too much. We don't want it to become, more than what we intend. We don't want it to be overcomplicated, but it could be effective. And if it could be effective at, again, lowering the withdrawals from this account that we have, I think it could be a positive thing. And like I say, for somebody who's on a fixed income that uses very little, if it lowered their bill a little bit, I also see that as a positive.
Yeah, I'll just respond really quickly. I think you've touched on many of the same conversations that we had in 19 and 20 about this. There really is a fine balance, and you can see, some of the goals that we set. And did we strike it exactly the right way? That's really for the council to kind of just determine it at this point. But I think we've thrown a little bit more information as far as particularly, the comparison of the other billing issues, because I do know that was brought up and talked about at length. And again, I apologize, we didn't have anything to compare against other cities. But I think that is one of the concerns that we had, and again, we talked with council at length about it.
Councilor Hill.
I was just going to say, there's no question that the conservation over the last few years and the tiered system that our approach has been successful. It has. Can we improve it a little bit? Is I guess the conversation point.
Councilor Hanley has a question.
I just wanted to second what Councillor Shipley was saying. I think he expressed very well what I'm feeling about this. And I maybe would ask staff, with this graph that we're looking at right now, for example, I think one of the things that I'd like to have a clearer picture of, I can see obviously that we're trending downward. The real question, however, is given the growth of the population that is anticipated, Is that trend going to be sufficient? Especially if we should, I think, wisely and prudently prepare for the possibility that nature will not be providing the amount of water that we currently enjoy over the long term. So I think both the prospect of a decreased water source, even with the best management tools that we have, and with an increased population, I think we have to look seriously at what kind of per capita use we should anticipate having in 2030 and 2040. I think that'll tell us a lot more about whether or not further measures would be prudent. So that would be my request. I would second Councillor Shipley's request to continue this conversation, and that would be my specific request to staff to help us understand why reduction of per capita consumption may become more important 10 or 20 years out.
Okay, thanks, George. We're running over time. Councillor Ellsworth.
Yeah, I just want to agree as well with Councillor Shipley. I think he's spot on, and I'd love to continue the conversation. I also just want to note that in some of these conversations about water conservation, there's a text and a presumption of that it's intended to be punitive. It's intended to be about thinking about the future.
If I can point out just a couple of things on the per capita, and we could have done maybe a little bit different presentation, but in the public works presentation, when we compared with the Fox News information, you can see right there we broke it out by per capita, and it's a good illustration. In the city actually is doing, when you break it out by per capita, the city's doing it. In fact, the city's already meeting the state goal. So in the year 2000, the state set a conservation goal. They set several per capita goals, and we are already below those. So it's not a matter of whether are we doing the right thing. I think we're doing the right thing already.
Okay, so remind me, do we do a vote on this, or?
Well, there were a couple of suggestions. There was no formal motion, though. Is there a motion that anyone would like to make to bring this back?
Sure. I'll move that we see this again, that we look at some of the reports and information that Mr. Hanley referred to as far as per capita future use and what that might look like. I also would like us to further explore the expanding the tier system and seeing, reviewing any potential negative impacts of that, any concerns that we have with that, and what the potential advantages might be there. And realizing that it was looked at in 19 and 20, and I guess my thought is that some counselors back then might have just been thinking, we just want to do the least, the least exciting thing possible, right? Tier it, but don't go too far with it. So I think we're now at a point where we can digest it all again and look at it again. Sorry, long motion. Sorry.
Okay, so we'll take a vote. Councillor Hanley.
Yes. Can I quickly just add one little qualification to what I was saying? I specifically want to look at, if we're going into the future anticipating water consumption, I'd like to look at different scenarios with water sources as they are and water sources under drought. But anyway, sorry. Yes. I think you asked me to vote, right? Not to comment. Sorry.
Councillor Ellsworth.
Yes.
Councillor McKay, no. Councillor Shipley.
Yes.
Councillor Fillmore.
Yes.
All right. So we will do that. Staff has record of that. Right, next, a discussion regarding water conservation initiative, and that's presented by Doug Robbins, our Parks Rec Director, and James Cornaby, Parks and Rec Superintendent.
Good afternoon. Our presentation today is in response to a council discussion regarding the distribution of ARPA funds. And so I've got here with me today James Cornaby. He's our Parks and Grounds manager and is responsible for the day-to-day stewardship of our water use and utilization in the parks. So he'll be presenting with me today. We'd like to go through a little bit of the background and our history and the efficient use of water in parks and recreation, how we currently manage our water use using the latest industry standards and latest smart irrigation technology, and what we could do with our contribution for conservation. All right, I found this old photograph. I think this was taken probably sometime in the 1950s of the very early years, where we had a night waterman, is what he was called. It's a little bit before my time, but kind of fun archival information. Our parks were irrigated manually with hoses and set sprinklers, and this individual and maybe a couple others would travel through the park system. It was a lot smaller at the time, and would set these heads and move them around all evening long into the morning. This was the technology at the time. It was great. It provided a great service, but this is what we had. And we're managing our water use really based on feel and appearance and aesthetics, but really from a subjective point of view. So it was low efficiency, but that was the tech we had at the time. Then came the 1960s and 70s with our single site controllers. These are interesting devices. You might even be familiar with some of these early models. They were analog, mostly a lot of springs, some electronic components and things, or a combination of both. But these were really innovations that really changed the game, because it enabled you to program an irrigation cycle and have start and stop times when you weren't present on site. So it was a little higher tech. Adjustments could be made at each controller, so you still had to travel out to each site to make these adjustments. But once they were made, it would run until further adjustments were made. This was also kind of a point in time when irrigation design became very important, because permanent irrigation systems were part of this single site control philosophy. So it enabled our managers to spend a lot more time doing other things. It was a big innovation throughout the entire agriculture industry, and it enabled our night watermen to get some rest. Then in 1998, Parks and Recreation was one of the leaders here in the area in moving to full-scale centralized control. And we adopted the MIR 5000 system, which was really an innovation that linked or networked every one of these site controllers through radio communications to one central control that was at our offices. That enabled us to make all kinds of improvements, including installing master valves at each point of connection. That's one great big valve on the line that comes into the entire park that can shut down the entire facility globally. In addition, flow sensors were added just downstream from that. So if we programmed in a high flow tolerance, it would shut down that master valve. That was really groundbreaking, because previous to those days, if you had a mainline break in a park, it would run all night long and deplete the water system for all of the other uses. So this enabled us to program in those tolerances and shut down those critical flow failures that would come up in the middle of the night when no one was around. Enabled us to collect increasing levels of data and track weather, install rain gauges and other things that we did. We found that during the late 90s and early 2000s, we were saving 40% in our water use compared to what we were using before. So this brings up modern irrigation management. First of all of our staff is trained in the QUEL program. That's Qualified Water Efficient Landscaper. So all of our grounds technicians go through this training as part of their qualifications to work. And then we keep our staff current in the latest in irrigation training offered through the Irrigation Association and industry groups. Design is fundamental to the successful use of water. And that involves all kinds of elements, including zoning like plants that use similar amounts of water, drip irrigation, using native and adaptable species, the use of mulch, drip irrigation. I kind of go back to one of the first projects that we worked on when I came to Provo, and it was the North University Greenway. And that project has really turned out to be a successful linear park running from 3700 north all the way up to the mouth of the canyon, where we've got areas that we have traditional landscaping with some limited turf areas, and then other areas that are non-irrigated, others that are a combination of drip and overhead spray. And then the most recent projects, the Rock Canyon Trailhead, which is a very water conservative design, and the current project we're working on right now, the design for Slate Canyon Park, where we're really implementing the same techniques, the same concerns, the same considerations that we did, over 20 years ago on the North University Greenway. Let's see, system audits. I'll tell you that an irrigation system in a park is only as good as it is the first day it's installed. From that moment on, there's an ongoing effort to maintain it and repair it to keep it in functioning at that system, at that level of efficiency. So we use tests. Periodically, we'll go through each system, set up catch cans, and do a water audit on these facilities to make sure they're still functioning the way they were designed. You might think about your own yard and how many irrigation heads you might have in your yard if you have one. You might have 9, 10 heads. I would ask how many of those heads are in perfect alignment at this moment in time. We live in an imperfect world. Sometimes they get out of adjustment. So you're constantly adjusting those. Now imagine a few thousand people running through your yard, pumping these heads. We have our staff and they're very busy all the time making these adjustments, making sure these systems are running as designed and running as effectively as possible. Scheduling is something we focus on, and it's a very involved element of our management. They all depend on topography. Each site is different. Each site has site characteristics that are different, soil types, slopes, cyclone soak, water windows that you have to consider. But our goal in landscape irrigation is really just to replace the water that is used by our landscape plants. Okay, so we follow evapotranspiration. That's really the water that's drawn through a plant, whether it's a tree, shrub, or turf grass, and it's evaporated in the atmosphere. That's the water we're trying to replace. Our team is not trying to fill the aquifer. Just want to make sure we're clear with that. Just replace that landscape water. And so that's what our system is designed to do. And James will talk a little bit more about the system that we currently have that that really helps us get that done.
Okay, Doug, real quick, we are not your fault, but we are over time. Do we have exact specifics on how you use ARPA money?
Yep,
Okay.
and James can follow up on that. Right now. Yeah, thanks.
I guess we'll go to the fun stuff. All right, let's get through all this. Weather track, which is our new central irrigation control system. It's a really sophisticated system where we can now program in a vast amount of data, from percent slope on what your plant material needs, and learn that flow and take these management practices that I've talked about to the next level. We were actually able to run our system. So we're very proud of that. We were also successful in being awarded in it through the innovation grant process, which is taking the system here on Center Street, which is one of our oldest systems, and we don't have that capability of connecting that system to our weather track system. But with new advancements in technology and remote connectivity to there, we were actually able to come up with some new products that would work well with this, and we're successful in that grant application award and have that implemented now. So that system is now controlled through the weather track. And then also all of our new sites that Doug talked about are designed through the best management practice. So one of our top priorities obviously is the downtown corridor, making that doing our part to make that a successful, vibrant downtown. And this image right here demonstrates one of our greatest challenges. Irrigating this narrow strip of turf here, it's inefficient. It's hard to irrigate an 8-foot park strip, let alone a 20-inch park strip. So we would like to do something here. We feel like there's more work that can be done here to help conserve water down here. Our goal here is what we would like to see in these center medians here is removing the narrow walkway and that narrow strip of grass and putting in a decorative paver, a decorative concrete, and installing nice tree grates around there. So
And walk 2, or you just mean removing the turf, making the turf decorative pavers,
we'd like to do both.
the whole thing?
Yeah, irrigation, which is a much more water efficient design. However, when people are parking in these center parking stalls, they need a safe path to move to the mid-block crossings or to the block crossings. And they've got to have it.
But what is the kind of the length from which block to which block are you looking at?
We'd like to go from 5th West all the way up to 1st East. Take what we can and go as far as we can. And
So how much was to do the last slide? How much to do
The grant?
no? Oh, I see, you already got.
yeah, we were successful and we already.
Gotcha. So
Yeah.
Okay, so our money would go, so this money would go towards just this?
Yes, yes, yeah. Gotcha. Another project that we would like to do, and this, Doug talked about this a little bit. The greatest ability that we have to save or conserve, manage this resource is through weather track. I talked about that briefly, maybe just a little bit more explanation on this, but the system is so sophisticated. A majority of our controllers are equipped with an option called OptiFlow, where it will go through and it learns the zone. Every time you put in a new zone, it will learn what that flow amount is. It will then take that calculated amount, conjoin it with other zones so that it's maximizing the main line capacity. Now, as it does that, anytime we set a parameter on there, if it's flowing above or below that threshold, it will shut the system down and send alerts towards head. And the beauty of this is every single Parks and Recreation employee that has access to this system. So they're receiving notifications on a daily basis. They can make those corrections remotely with their phone. So there's a lot of capability there. There's a lot of sites now that when these master valves and flow sensors were installed throughout the 70s and 80s, equipment's timing out. New technology now, the old flow sensors or with turbine, the components wear out, they don't read accurately or they can't sense very low flow. They're now working through those, but it's a slow process. And a couple of the major projects that we would like to see.
Any questions?
I mean, they both look awesome. So we've got a limited pool of money here. In your opinion, which one does the most good for water conservation?
I think option number 2 does, because we may see, it's kind of this double-edged sword, right? On Center Street, it's highly visible area, you see overspray, you see water, in the curb and stuff like that. Negative perception there, I 100% agree with that image, right? But the reality of the situation is the savings that we can achieve through updating master valves and flow sensors far supersedes, conversion of narrow small areas, just because we're impacting acres of turf versus narrow strips. Yeah. Thank you. We have to weigh out that.
No, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Makes sense. All right. So is this something we take a vote for if we want to channel those funds, or is this something that you need to do in a council meeting?
So if the council would like to give some direction, we can bring back an appropriation to a night meeting to actually appropriate the funds for a specific project. Would be the easiest way for staff to move forward.
Well, I would make a motion that we appropriate the existing ARPA funds that we've been discussing to Parks and Rec for conservation use towards option 2, or to talk more further about that, but towards conservation projects for Parks and Rec.
Are you saying smart controllers specifically?
Well, we're looking at this one specifically, right? Is that, I don't know.
Yeah, it's just easier, I think, to name them, so maybe we call this one
I would call this a master valve flow sensor upgrade, because all of our sites are equipped with smart controllers, so.
For the master valve flow sensor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Upgrade.
I think option 2 is good.
Option 2.
Smart systems.
Okay.
If I understood what the motion was, I would second it, but I'm not sure. You were saying, we're saying option 2, right? That's what I heard you say. Yeah, I would second that.
Thanks, George. All right, let's take a vote. Counselor Ellsworth,
Yes.
Counselor McKay, yes, Counselor Shipley,
Yes.
Counselor Fillmore,
Yes.
and Counselor Hanley.
Yes.
So that passes unanimously, and we are back on time almost. Thank you so much, guys. All right, we are going to look now at a presentation regarding the River District project and boundary line adjustments. And this was presented by Jason White, Jim Ivory. Oh, no, this was presented by Jason.
Yeah.
What would you like us?
At the podium, people. And Jason, it might help you just go do a quick overview on.
Yes, we'll tackle that. So Jason White, the 50s Capitol. We've been in here, not this room, but that room, a number of times. So hopefully we can give you a little refresher and why we're here, and hopefully clear it up for everybody, and then walk through it. So if we could maybe advance, who am I at? Should I have a clicker? Oh, it works. Yes, okay. So this, the River District, as we call it, we've been working on this for around 3 years now. And just to refresh everybody's memory, there's a site we've acquired multiple parcels that have all now been combined and have different uses. And we've been in multiple times for an incubator use here on the east side, right along University Avenue. That's really not party to our discussion today, but that's part of it. And then the build for rent townhomes. So this is 200-ish townhomes in this section here, just west of this line. That we are close to breaking ground on, and those are going to be for rent and really a product that doesn't exist right now in Provo. So we think it'll be nice to keep some of those folks that is not easy right now. And then the remainder of this master plan is in Orem. And so we have a restaurant village along 800 North in Orem, hospitality, which is nightly rental, just south of that. And then there's a little section we'll talk about today, just south in these, it's about 20 units that are the exact same thing as what is zoned right now and what we're going to be breaking ground on in Provo. And so that's where we are today. Really, the question on the table that we're here to discuss is one of the things that we think would be really great for residents is if this lived together. Because right now it would live in a portion of these 20 townhomes would live in Orem, and 200 of them live in Provo. And that comes with different school districts, different wards, wayfinding. If you DoorDash something and all of a sudden you're in the 800 North versus like 5200 North, trying to figure out like how did that just jump? Well, it's because you're crossing the boundary between Orem and Provo. So at some point it was made aware to us that this would be a living issue, and so we tried to figure out a way to incorporate this as in one municipality. So where we are today is we are currently zoned and approved in. The plan is we can go ahead and break ground and build all of these. There's been a lot of discussions with Orem and with staff in Provo about how to have what we've been made aware. There's just some considerations we're talking about on this parcel that we wanted to chat about today. And so that's why we're doing a community. Let's move forward. So here's the east side of our property line, and then cut across where currently there's an Orem city boundary, which would then be erased in favor of, I guess this is a touchscreen.
Yeah.
You can use this little pen you can draw.
There's a pen too.
On to the side of the TV.
Yeah,
Magnet
that's
on the
not gonna touch it. Oh, here we go. So this would be the new boundary that I'm erasing it now. Anyway, you get the gist. So that's the goal, is we want this to live with the Provo community, and it seems like there's a lot of support to do so, and it makes all the sense in the world. We're just trying to make sure we get everybody on board with any questions or considerations that have come up. And here's the renderings of what the townhomes are planning to look like. I've shown those already. I don't remember how many times we've been in here and shown them or not, but that's the aesthetic, more of a Park City aesthetic. Okay, so this is when we came into Provo, what we discussed. is we, as well as basically everybody in Provo that has a horse in the race, would like to see this trail extend all the way up to the north in Orem. We would like to do that with, we're also going to connect it. If you see the arrow here shooting off to the east along 5600 North, it will be connected into the Provo River Parkway. So you can follow the trail up the west side of the river, which will then extend all the way up to 800 North. So it'll connect the restaurants and the nightly rentals and all the townhomes. So here is kind of the map that has allowed us to have a lot of conversations about this. So this is the Orem parcel, and what we have overlaid here is we've overlaid all of the easements and infrastructure that exist on this parcel. So there's not a lot of room here east to west. We spent a ton of time trying to figure out how to build this site when we were acquiring the land from Central Utah Water, and everything that you see in between all of the colored lines is basically the areas that are buildable. You can't go across most of those easements because they're either large water lines, power lines, gas lines, all kinds of easements. And so this is where we are today. This is what's approved in Orem. And one of the concerns that has come up is, given how tight the site is to the river, the trail would veer at this point, which is the larger 10-foot wide trail, would veer kind of through the center of the site and then continue on and then meet back up with the river and follow it up to 800 North. We would love to put it on the river, but we can't push any of these buildings back because of road widths, and we can't slide any of those down because of other easements. And so we're a little locked into what our options are here. So one of the thoughts in one of our working meetings with some of the city council members was, is there a laser on this? Maybe not. Is on the far side here, right here, you'll see the path, and then it breaks and comes this way. And if we were to connect that and create it along the boundary of the let me go back to the line. Along the boundary of the river, that still gives us a path, like a river walkway along the river. It just, there's not enough width to do a 10-foot wide path because some of these are only 12 feet off of the river bank. Some of these, the depths between the building and the river bank. And so that's kind of where we are today. And that's the expectation of what will get built under Orem's approval. We just want to have an open discussion on what can we do to potentially bring this into Provo where it makes sense for everybody, and we kind of accomplish all of our goals, but we keep going.
Okay. Councilor Ellsworth.
Yeah, thank you for considering our concerns about access to the river and the Provo River Trail. We as a community only get the opportunity to install a trail like this every 60 years or something when there's a new development proposal. So it is a unique and important opportunity, and I think if we could go back in time 60 or 70 years, we'd try and do a better job along the whole river. That along those lines, will the orange proposed Provo River Trail be designated with an easement?
Yes.
Okay. And would the exterior narrower path be designated with an easement?
No, I don't believe so.
So a no, or?
Well, I mean, we can look into it. At this point, it wasn't planned to be, because it services the resident units.
Yeah.
And so we would make it kind of a dual purpose. I could actually take it off to some of our development partners on like the practical implications of that, but we haven't really contemplated that yet.
Okay, yeah, if that was possible, it would be really terrific, just to preserve, again, the whole intent, not the whole, but this idea, this concept that people want access to the river, and we want to sustain that over time.
Okay, that makes sense.
Can I just follow up on that? I think the easement concept is very important. Otherwise, it's just private property should be shut off.
Yeah, exactly.
We in order to go to all this trouble, we want an easement-based path along the river. It would be a permanent accessory to the citizens we can use, right? If you don't do an easement, then it's subject to putting a gate on it.
Yeah, I hear your concern. This is not a gated community, but I guess at some point,
Well,
long down the road, something would
call that
change.
figurative otherwise.
Yeah, yeah.
You want to assure that that pathway on the river is perpetually accessible. It says. I appreciate Shannon.
Now, technically, aren't we past that point? Like, they already have approval to do. I think that's pretty done, isn't it?
But
I'm
we're,
just-
we're talking about if they're doing the Orem.
Well, yeah.
Let me have Jamie answer some of these more practical considerations.
Well, in regards, well, the Orem.
Jamie Chapman, Walter Pratt, we're the development partners on this deal. And just to step back a little bit, the process for this parcel that is Orem, we still have to give, we've got rezone approval, we've got concept plan approval. Next step would be project plan either in Provo or a site plan process in Orem. So there's time to do this. And this idea of the public trail or public sidewalk in addition to the public trail is somewhat new. So we haven't really contemplated the easement, how it works with the front doors, how we separate, how we give these residents the feeling of some privacy while also having a public access trail right in front of their units. So these are things that we have to consider. Just haven't been able to do that yet, but we're up to the end.
Okay, so
you still have both trails.
Correct.
Right.
So we would agree to the Orem one with the proposed trail like you will do through the neighborhood.
Yes, and another thing to point out is in Orem, the development agreement that we got approved with the rezone included a map that showed the trail deviating from the river because we knew this was an issue.
Right.
And so I believe my understanding of the development agreement in Orem would be directly adopted into Provo. And that would include that same kind of language and graphic.
But you'd be open to an easement on the Provo section.
Yeah. Okay. Have we had a chance to look at the Orem development agreement?
This is just a preliminary discussion, see if you're open to the idea of the annexation.
They're looking for what are we with the idea if they're gonna wait and have it all be Provo. They don't want to start, that's what we're looking, that's what they're looking for.
Are we open to a motion?
I have some questions.
Councilman Ellsworth?
Yeah, I think it would be great to get a report from either the council staff or into our zone code. And this is how the council could achieve their objectives of having these two easements. And then that would, in my mind, clear up some of this confusion that still exists about the transition.
Maybe we got to invite Mr. Petroni to comment on the process.
Yeah, that's totally possible. Also, I mean, I would make a motion for some kind of report.
Whether we're amenable to an annexation?
I think that's our goal because
I would make that motion after we hear from Bill.
Yeah. Alternative Bill, one second. I think our goal today is if you tell us, hey, we hate everything about this, then we just can but then we can move forward with what we.
So I've kind of
microphone right here.
I've anticipated this being having been entitled in Orem, we would just accept a certain amount. The Provo project went through the rezone. Looking for is this the general intention of, is this a concept something you would allow to come into Provo, or do you want it to just stay in Orem?
I think you're speaking of hospitality and restaurants as well. That doesn't seem to be part of the package.
That's going to be a good fight. We've had these conversations.
Yeah, right. So in my mind, it's no brainer to do the annexation and to unify those residential parcels for school and church and other purposes. That's assuming that we're going to be able to fine tune it with respect to our ordinances. I'd make a motion to, I'm not sure how far we can go, Brian, but I make a motion to call it a resolution of support for the concept of annexation for this particular parcel.
Well, I mean, I don't know that you want to go so far as doing a resolution, because that implies bringing it back to another meeting. I think just saying a motion in support of considering the annexation further. I mean, they're going to have to file the annexation petition then you're gonna have to accept the annexation.
The next step would be going through development services.
Boundary adjustment instead of
Annexation.
an annexation. So it's first gonna come back to you and to the Durham Council both, and then you'll go through the whole process, and then someone will come back to you to actually approve.
Don't have to give the gentlemen what they need. Go back to Orem and say.
You bring up a good point, because one of the things, it's taken a long time to get it where it is in Orem. And what we come back and everything changes. And now we're just toast because we now have, we went with something, we have nothing, and so I don't know what that looks like. We just kind of trying to read the room and figure out if this is something we should pursue. The boundary line adjustment, I think there's a lot of support both in Orem and in Provo to just make that happen. I don't know the steps involved, but I think it comes to both city councils. One releases the property effectively and one accepts it. And so that's what we're trying to get to is that, if we're all on the same page, we just don't know how hairy it could get, and we're trying to ascertain that to some degree.
I guess what I'm asking, Brian, is, we could do a non-binding straw vote on the one hand, but on the other hand, we could do something maybe a little more definitive, a little more reliable for these folks as they go forward and spend time and money for them.
I just have some questions. So do we need to have some kind of development agreement that's triggered? And this is a really cool concept overall, but you've been working under Orem's code and Orem's preferences on this parcel, and we do want to get our preferences, which are these two easements, integrated. So what's that process? How do we?
First, I think it's probably a mistake to send too strong of a message, because you can't approve the boundary adjustment, signal pre-approval of something that you haven't received the consideration for.
However,
the right way to go. To the degree that you want to make a motion, I don't know what the motion is, other than to say, I make a motion that we all say this makes sense to me.
So I get the impression that they're not going to be doing along the river in the Orem Park. There's not the space for it.
I think we should have an easement.
And then to Shannon's question about that, to Councillor Ellsworth's question about that, it is an atypical process. If we were doing an annexation, we would make that a requirement of the annexation agreement in order to approve the annexation. But the boundary line adjustment is actually between us and Orem, not between us.
Adjustments we would apply adjacent to the river. We would apply some kind of trail easement. We would require.
But Orem has no say on the river trail.
Probably knows this better than I would, but we have to do a project plan for this parcel, which would be then subdivision on the record plat.
I'm not convinced. Maybe a better question for Brian. I'm not convinced the city has the ability.
A project plan approval has to be approved if it meets the requirements. And you get to, I guess there's probably a timing element here. When is the best?
Why don't we just have a memorandum of understanding between the two of us, Brian, that says that's what they're.
You could do that.
What's the enforcement mechanism?
Yeah. Memorandum.
We're not going to use their commercial. We won't approve their commercial project.
But that's a decision for the council, right? About how
record an easement, two easements basically on these paths that we're describing. And I don't know how you word the easement language, that it's a public access or a public trail easement. And that would be.
Well, let me interrupt you, because I think I just had an idea, which I think is probably better.
Okay.
Because the easement's going to be in Provo's name, presumably.
Well, that's my point. We can grant an easement to
if the boundary line adjustment happens.
Predicate upon.
And if the boundary line adjustment doesn't happen, the easement is not going to be
vacated. Yeah, exactly.
It's been brought up a few times about the school district, and I bring this up because we talked about it as we had a couple of annexations come through, is that there is a separate process for that is going to be something separately that Alpine familiar if that would be the case for a boundary line adjustment. I would imagine. So just another thing to think about. I know that's come up a few times in coordination with this, and if you could kind of expand on that.
And Bill was sitting here, so I was comfortable with the disconnect, but there was some expression of them that they wanted to see not just all property coming from Orem to Provo. So we sat down and talked about some property that is in Provo City boundary that would make sense to, as part of this whole boundary adjustment, to move over to Orem. So there's actually 3 plats being prepared that would be brought to both Orem and Provo. 2 of them would have property that's in Provo that'd be sent over to Orem, and this one would have the Orem property brought over to Provo. Has everybody seen the plat, or is anybody familiar with the properties?
No, I heard about this from the developers, and again, it would be great to have some kind of report on it, because they're gonna get mixed up with other properties that probably don't need extra drama.
Orem residents, it has backing by Provo residents, but this road is primarily just another half, and none of our residents access it's on. And then there's a parcel that has been split for decades. Half of it's in Orem, half of it's in Provo, and we're just going to consolidate the whole parcel into Orem. So we'll prepare. We have maps. I just didn't have those part of this slide, so we can bring reservation about those.
It's basically just cleaning up, because
Sometimes boundaries aren't done the right way.
Can we get that on another work meeting agenda?
Yeah.
See the maps and understand the context.
Yeah.
Okay, so we want to do more background that Shannon's mentioned. But we also want to help direct these people in their development. Are you saying, Shannon, that you can't give any opinion either way unless we have another work meeting? Or
My motion would be that we have a straw vote in favor of general support for this boundary change, coupled with our expectation that there'll be an easement granted.
okay, I can second that.
Is that a motion that you're comfortable with, Brian, or do we need to make it more vague? Like, we support future consideration of a boundary adjustment.
Yeah, it's so watered down. These guys need something significant.
Could I just make one other comment for everybody? One of the reasons why we're trying to push this is because, which you may not be aware of, there's a canal that runs through here that a lot of it is owned by, a lot of the rights are owned by Provo, and we have to reroute that. And so that work has to start in October because of the way the canal runs. And so I know it may not be your issue, it's just one of our issues that we have to deal with, because otherwise we miss an entire year. And so we're trying to kind of figure this out, because we got to start moving dirt quick, or else we got to wait.
It's been seconded. I don't want to water it down anymore. We'll consider possibility down the road, maybe.
Well, I don't think that was the question from Councillor Ellsworth, but the comment actually caused the motion, because I consider the motion to already be, if that's not what the motion is, then in answer to Councillor Ellsworth, probably I would have a problem.
No, in support of considering. That's like, we agree that we'll consider it. That's nothing for these guys.
But that's the state law.
Well, okay, I mean, if you want to restate it and say, in support of considering the boundary line adjustment when it comes before us in its due course, with preliminary inclination to like it.
I might reword it.
Right, I mean, I'm trying to, but I mean, the point is, you can't bind yourselves to do something that you haven't gone through the legal process for.
Understand. So if we have sufficient caveats, we're okay.
Which I think was the question. So what are the caveats?
Well, my motion was that we have a straw vote indicating general stick to the requirement for an easement on the river trail.
You be okay with, and subject to following the required legal process for the boundary line adjustment?
Of course. Yeah.
Then
so moved.
Okay, in that case, I'm fine.
2 easements, right?
And then
Gotcha.
This is gonna bifurcate.
Gotcha.
Hey, there we go.
That one was always planned out.
Can you second that?
I'll second that. Yep.
Let's vote.
All right, so let's do a vote. Councillor McKay, yes. Councillor Shipley.
Yeah.
Councillor Fillmore.
Yes.
George, do we still have you?
Yes, and I'm voting yes.
Okay, Councillor Ellsworth.
Yes.
Okay, to get those,
Prepare information on the other adjustments.
Great, yeah, the other adjustments and the development agreement they have existing with Orem, that kind of stuff.
Thank you.
And please
Appreciate it.
follow up with staff as to when you need to meet with us again. So
Okay.
I know you're on a time crunch, so.
Yeah, we'll keep cranking. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, sometime.
All right, well, we are gonna take a break now and we're only 12 minutes late. We'll do a break for 10 minutes, so we'll come back at 2:55. We're getting 3 extra minutes done.
Hi, sir. Are you okay? What's up?
Recording stopped.
I would just, I think I'm gonna go back and listen to what Bill and very end. Less what Ryan did very end.
I mean, I was putting down like a.
Okay.
You're just transcribe that very.
All right. We are going to discuss an ordinance amending Provo City Code to allow meeting halls for rent as a condition.
Yes, please. Okay, thank you, council. So this one has been going for a little bit, and it's been a little controversial. So yes, all right, go to the next one then. All right. So this slide is because this item was actually continued at Planning Commission, so Planning Commission saw it twice. So these were the changes from the first hearing to the second hearing. That part's not so important for you. If you go on the next slide. So the request comes from these owners here, that the pensions that own that farm. Their proposal at the beginning is to do kind of a dance hall event space in the middle of their property. To be able to do that, because they're in the agricultural zone, they need to amend the permitted uses, and they've proposed this to be added as a conditional use in all A1 zones. All right, so that's kind of where staff had some opposition. If you look at the meeting, the purpose and objectives, so there's the property. I think, well, let's go through these, because if you're not familiar with the property, I think that plays into this request. This is down just south of the elementary school, and go to the next slide. So this is kind of the current condition affecting this particular property immediately. Go to the next slide. So there's the request is to add meeting halls for conditional use. Next one. And some of their proposed conditions. So in between the first Planning Commission hearing and the second Planning Commission hearing, staff came up with these proposed conditions for the applicant. They wanted to see some type of standardized condition to make sure that we give to the Planning Commission and to the applicant to look over. If you want to go to the next one.
Just on that Planning Commission meeting, commitments they made, statements they made. Aaron and I got together after that Planning Commission meeting, generated this list. When they came back for the second meeting, they provided a whole lot more information that the Planning Commission didn't see in the first meeting. I'm sorry, Aaron, go ahead.
No, that's helpful context. It should also be noted that they had some disagreement about a couple of the conditions that we proposed. They met with us in our office about those, but we said to be comfortable providing something to the Planning Commission, this is the language we proposed. So I think this also helps give us some context about what this means for the city. It's not just the Finch property that this would affect in that red rectangle. It's all this green, all this A1, A15, A110, A11, all the A120. So here's our office, right? Here's the Finch's property. So this is the southwest of the city. This is kind of southeast. This is the north part. I've tried to highlight all the agricultural zones so we can understand are also small agricultural properties. So they're a 10,000 square foot lot with a house on it. The last Planning Commission meeting was to do some sort of minimum acreage. Next slide. Planning staff is still against this, and the reasons for that are found up to all A1 zones in the city is out of context with what the zone is supposed to be. I think that we've identified some adverse impacts that could still exist no matter what conditions you put on this as standard conditions. And I think the agricultural zone should probably remain as agricultural use and not commercial. So that's where we're at on this one. Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
Yes.
So the path for someone who has agricultural property but would like to do something like this, some agro-tourism situation on their property, would be just to come in on their specific property and rezone a particular part of their property. So right now, you can, in the ag zone, you can do petting zoos, corn mazes, different types of those types of commercial activities. Or rezone. A rezone or for that particular part of their property to a commercial use, yes. Basically.
Yes, which in most cases would probably be against the general plan designation of the property.
So why haven't they pursued that option?
Because I think the main reason is staff led them commercial on their site. The other is to do a text.
As the planning commission debated this, they really pursued the rezone option, and should there be some kind of zone change option, because that allows for more scrutiny than a conditional use permit. So the planning commission gravitated to the zone change option. There's, for example, talk about overlay zone, an agricultural overlay zone overlap this. We'd much rather prefer that over the conditional use option, simply because the city has more control to understand what we're getting and to guarantee what we're being shown than the conditional use track.
Yeah, so that idea came up in the planning commission to write an actual brand new zoning ordinance for a new overlay that would allow this type of use in an A1 zone. So it'd be writing new code, but as an overlay, we'd have a little bit more control of how this is built, where it's built, and things like that. If this was the idea that, like Bill said, the council wanted to pursue.
I know you all know this, and so but it's probably worth just reminding that that conditional uses are not discretionary, right? That when the code says you can have a conditional use and here are the conditions of having the use, if the conditions are met, the use has to be approved. It's not a discretionary.
I have some questions here. When I was on the planning commission, we were trying to get away from conditional uses, right? Is that still the trajectory?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. And then tell me what would like a minor or a major home occupation, I guess this wouldn't apply because you're not doing it in your home, you're doing it in a separate structure.
Right.
Is that right?
Okay. Right. Home occupations have to be entirely in the home and no more than 49%. Okay. This would be an accessory building.
Okay. And then my last question for now is, oftentimes within ag zone, property owners get some kind of tax relief by applying the green belt, right? And I don't know if that's 100% synonymous with our ag zone, or if we have to apply to the green belt, but do we know if this is under the green belt?
That was brought up in the hearing with planning commission. We understand that this property is benefiting from that tax break.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I think it's significant that over 50% of their land will be paved and have a vent barn on it. So that's over 50% of the land not being farmed.
Right.
Well, it's commercial, but it's getting a tax break.
Yeah.
Right.
Assuming they're still applying. Anyway, sorry.
Yeah, no, those are good points to raise.
Questions before Aaron goes on?
Just some other things that.
Can I make a motion that, just announce that Travis is on the phone. Councilor Hogan.
I second that motion. So a couple other things that came out of the planning commission was they wanted to add, if this did move forward, they recommended some additional conditions with regards to security. They would propose that one security guard be provided for every 75 adults that attend the event. That any event that has live music or is run past 10 p.m. would be required to have a security guard. And that, like I said before, there'd be a minimum size of lot of 5 acres for somebody to be able to apply for the conditional use.
Can I ask a question here? I've never heard of concept of having a security guard. I didn't watch the planning commission meetings. Can you tell me where that's coming from?
That's coming from our experience with other dance halls in the city. Go ahead, Bill.
That's absolutely true, but because of that, Mr. Finch proffered at the planning commission meeting, first planning commission meeting, that he has one point of access into his property. That was one of his big kind of selling points, was that I can control who enters this property. There's one way in, I can put a security person on there, and I can control who's coming in and going out. So that's what that takes.
I guess what value does a security guard offer to a land use that's applied? It doesn't.
Their situation and the amount of calls the police department is getting. That's a conditional use permit application. Do better. Planning commission can continue that item to give them the opportunity to demonstrate that they could do that. But on-site security was a big.
There was violence.
Okay, that's these things.
And in this occupancy, that no more guests were going to be able to get in. You have to have somebody there at the gate to make sure that's happening. So they profit that as.
This is probably, Chair, if I may, just really briefly, this is maybe also a good time to mention, if we get to the night meeting and the council's not inclined to go forward on this, it won't make additions to kind of simplify the references to other city code sections. I don't know that planning staff have even seen those yet. So that may be something that if you're considering going forward might require some explanation or a continuance for them to opine on.
I don't think that was in our notes, right? I didn't see that.
Well, I think the one that you got was with my changes. The one that got published was with my changes, but I don't know the planning staff even seen.
But would planning commission have to review those changes?
No, they were minor, kind of technical, and it's not substantive in nature. Just there were a couple places where I felt like it was better to. There were a couple places where the conditions were essentially restating another part of city code and then referring to it. And I don't generally like that because if the other city code changes, then they might be in conflict. So I said,
concerning those conditions, I think Brian raises a really important point. That is in the second planning commission meeting. And you're going to see these illustrations tonight, probably in your presentation. A lot of pictures were shown about the quality of the product down the CUP route. I think we should add even more to those conditions to make sure that the pictures we got shown is what gets delivered. For example, you could build a Quonset hut under these conditions, the existing conditions.
Oh.
Concrete dome.
I don't know what you had there.
Ugly, cheap buildings.
But an overlay zone you wouldn't have to be because our rezone application process is you have to give us a concept plan that shows us parking and landscaping, and you have to give us preliminary or very conceptual architecture. And those things typically go into the development agreement. So that we're going to get what we've been shown. And to me, that's the safety net of the overlay zone process.
Councilor Shipley.
So this is a little bit awkward with the applicant because staff originally said, don't go down the, this path. But then when we vetted it through planning, it was kind of like, well, maybe this is the wrong path to be on. So I guess what my question is for tonight, for the sake of the applicant, and for the sake of just property owners in general in Provo, how do we help come to a conclusion where there's some result of this effort that's been gone through, and maybe it's the overlay zone, but somewhere where the applicant feels like there's a clear path forward to get a vote, on what
I think the first question is this something that we want in the city? And if the council thinks this is something that we want in the city, that we want farm ranch owners to be able to do, then we have that discussion. But
your first question is that general one.
Yeah.
The concept something you're comfortable with, agritourism or what they call it.
Yeah.
If it is, then what's the best tool to get there?
Yeah. So I'll just give my feedback, and I think it is something we need to explore and be able to have a tool in our toolbox.
I agree.
So whatever we need to do, however staff would like to move. I mean, I guess I would defer back to staff to say, look, but if I own 100 acres in Provo and I want to put a barn at the edge of my property along with everything else I'm doing, I think that's great. I think there should be able to be a bit somewhere on an agricultural property.
So Councilor Shipley, I think to answer your question, I think the way to make that so the way to do what you're suggesting would be for some councilor who thinks that to make a motion. And a motion could happen in a couple different ways. It could be a motion to ask staff to come back with an overlay zone if you're convinced that's the right answer, or it could be a more generic motion to ask staff to come back with what staff believes is a better proposal for how to make this happen. But if that motion passed, then that would preempt the application in play.
So it acts as a substitute. We don't even vote on that. Right. But as a council, if that's the thought of the council, that we should just give them a yes/no vote, at this point because they've gone to this point. But I still,
well, you can do that too. You can go ahead and take the vote on the implied motion and then make a motion saying, but I think this is the right thing to do.
It's really zone option and not, but I think we can bring that back to the process. So let's get through planning first. Yeah. But I think we bring it to the process pretty quickly.
At this point in time, the Finches perceive that the planning commission and community development both have serious reservations about what they want to do.
So it is 4-3. So the motion was to approve it with
Question. What is and maybe you want to get there in down the road with an overlay is presented, but.
We'll get to this in our next presentation a little bit, but we like to stay ag, keep their animal rights, keep their farming rights.
Faster, but I want to ag zone.
Could I ask Mr. Pepperoni another question? Issue has come up, and then do you consider their past behavior, ordinances, or not particularly caring well for their property?
I feel like it is our job as the city staff to protect the city in every way we can. So whether the person, so we try to make sure everything is done in writing. We try to make sure we've gone through a process that protects the city as much as possible. So to me, it's our job to minimize the city's risk, and we try to.
Travis?
Staff and planning commission on this one. I kind of started to pursue some sort of kind of broadly and how sweeping of a change this would be. Choose something like a zone change or overlay or whatever on a case-by-case basis. And so it's possible I won't be voting no as is, and then asking staff to pursue or to bring back a recommendation for something they would be comfortable that would still allow us to kind of follow the intent of what we're trying to do, which is give agricultural property owners more options. Thank you.
All right, any other questions for Aaron? Aaron, you're totally gonna get us back on time, I think. Like, wait. Not really. Okay. All right, thank you, Aaron. Next, a discussion regarding zoning code. Did that backwards. Presented by Michael Sanders, our policy analyst, and Aaron Ardmore will also be helping he's our planning supervisor.
All right, great. Okay, well, good afternoon, council. So our staff has been coordinating the report back on the comprehensive zoning update during the May 2nd work meeting. It was that needs to be done, and so this picture right here is the printed out version of the city code. It's almost half of like the entire city code book, so it's pretty large, overly complex for both staff and developers. And right now I'm just going to turn it over to our neighborhood planner, Aaron, to do kind of like a mock walkthrough of what it would be like for a staff member developer to go through an application.
All right, so I will definitely lose one or more of you during this, and that's kind of the goal. So if you start to get glazed over, just raise your hand, and then I'll try to speed through it. But we wanted to kind of walk through to show you what a staff planner does on a typical review. How many sections of code we go through, how many times we're going from one code to the next. So we've got an example site plan here, and we start by checking the in bold there. Okay, step 2, we're already moving away from the zone code. We have to hit these links on these 4-digit numbers to go to the standard land use code. It's a antique way of looking at land uses. If you've ever gone through it, there's 142 pages, 2100, then there's 2101, 22, and so forth. So we go from the city code to the SLU code to find the proposed use to see if it matches the zone. Next, we jump back to the code. We verify that the use works, but there might be, if there is conditional use. So all these different sections that you'd have to go to depending on what the proposed use is. So we're still on step 1. Step 2, so we find out the permitted use works. Step 2 is we're going to start to review the actual lot standards of the site plan. This is the drawing that we're reviewing, right? So we're back in the gateway zone. But now we're back out of it because we have to go to 1434, a different section of code, to check against all these different applicable yard modifications. So we don't just have a simple, this is your front yard, this is your side yard, this is your rear yard setback. There are all these special circumstances that might be on the property that we have to check for. So we check for those. Now we can go to step 3. We're checking for yard requirements still. Yeah. So lot standards was 2. 3 is yard requirements. Again, we're jumping out of the code because we're having to check against clear vision standards, which are in a different chapter. Okay, so you're starting to get the idea of we're jumping around a lot. Again, please raise your hand if you're bored. Okay, so step 4. Step 4. Now we're to the building design. So first is height. But once again, we've got to jump out of the gateway zone because there's exemptions from building height that are in a different chapter. So we've got to make sure that the building we're looking at doesn't have any of those exemptions that we need to take out from our measurements. And I would add something I just didn't put in the slides here. Our definition for building height, without artificial terracing, and it takes a couple of us talking to each other sometimes to figure out what the building height measurement actually is. So that's a side. Okay, step 5. We're checking for transitional standards now. A lot of times we're checking in this section like we are here in the gateway zone, but other parts of the city we have transitional standards in a different chapter in 1434-300 for disparate uses between property lines. Now we're back in the gateway zone. We're checking against habitable floor depth, checking, from the street to where parking starts, if they have enough depth in the building. Some of these different design guidelines. Checking for projection, we have to jump out of that code section. We have to jump into 1437, a different chapter for vehicle parking, for bike parking. And on top of those, there's reduction requests that they can make. There's design standards that they have to meet in a different section. Now to landscaping. Landscaping is not only not in the right chapter, but it's in Title 15, a totally different title. So we're jumping to Title 15 now to check for landscaping standards. We're checking a different chapter for design standards for the specific corridor. We're checking a different chapter for trash storage. Is the trash storage where it's supposed to be? Does it look like it's supposed to look? Is it covered up appropriately? So that's that. Now we're back in the gateway zone, so we can review it against the walls and fences standard of the gateway zone. Not all zones have this specific standard. Some of them refer you back to 1434. This is a site plan review. So rezones, general plan things, those are more in depth. You're checking more plans, you're checking different long range plans, things like that. But just on a site plan review, you're not done yet. You have to see on the property, are there development agreements on the title? Are there variances in our case file history on the property that allow them to vary from any of those standards that you just looked at? Or are there any conditional use permits that run with the land? All right. So this is the standard work of a planner in Provo City. This was the idea of when the motion was made of taking a look at our zoning title. We've looked at different examples. This is an example from West Valley City. We've tried to start to go to this in some of our new zones that we've written, convert to table standards. Very simple. Everything's in a table. Here's your permitted uses, yes or no. Here's your standards for depending on the zone you are. It's very, what's the word I'm looking for?
Simplified.
User-friendly. User-friendly. Thank you. Consolidated. All these things. All right. So hopefully that gives you an idea of kind of the why we need this. And Michael's going to kind of go into what's next.
All right. Thanks, Aaron. So that's kind of the why. So now we're going to kind of report back on what our working group came up with as our scope of work. This was a a document that was included inside of your packet, and we emailed it out several weeks before this meeting. So I'm just going to go over it a little bit just for your benefit and the benefit of the public. And just this proposed scope of work is what would be used to build an RFP and use as guidance for a potential consultant if the council decides to move forward with this project. So to begin the process, we would want the consultant to first go through a preliminary assessment of our code. They'd be looking through all the existing regulations, including all the text and the maps, and just check it to see if it's being effective and relevant to be able to achieve the goals that are outlined in the general plan. In addition to that, they'll identify gaps, inconsistencies, and ambiguity, and any conflicts, because our code is so huge and it's been written by so many different people that there are sometimes conflicting standards in all the different titles. Oh, that's actually what I meant. Next slide. Okay, they would also be tasked to do a stakeholder engagement plan, because as we're going through this process of redoing the zoning code, we want to make sure that it's being able to achieve the vision of both the city and also the residents who live here. We would want the consultant to be able to gather opinions through workshops, surveys, and focus groups, to be able to get input from all the stakeholders such as city staff, neighborhood chairs, citizens, and business groups. Okay, now the real kind of part of what the zoning process update would be with the consultant. The city would be able to review and revise the zoning regulations to be able to align with best practices, contemporary planning principles, and the city's general plan, to be able to simplify and streamline the regulations, make them clear, more accessible, easier to navigate for both the developers and the city planners. And at the same time, at the request of the council, be able to incorporate innovative zoning techniques such as form-based code or performance-based zoning where appropriate. And so really one of the biggest impacts that the revised regulations, that the revised zoning code could have, is it would be able to give the city the tools to be able to achieve a lot of the goals that are outlined in the general plan. So in the general plan, there's, I think we identified like 40 something goals in the general plan that are affected through the planning department and through the Title 14 zoning code. So through this zoning process update, it would give us the tools to be able to help start achieving those goals pretty quickly. Finally, the consultant would have to also help us with some implementation strategies. So just to ensure that successful implementation would be able to occur, the consultant would be able to assess any other extra resources or staff needs, such as if we were going to put a form-based code in or any incentive zoning, then they would be able to properly train the staff, the city council, and the planning commission on how to make those land use decisions, and also ensure a smooth transition from the adoption of the revised regulations. And finally, they would prepare a comprehensive final report, including key findings and recommendations for change they would bring to the city council and the planning commission for their review and further recommendations and changes. So there we go. There's our scope of work. And now Aaron's going to go over some potential areas of improvement that the staff were able to identify while we were going through this process together.
Maybe just pause for a second. Any questions so far on anything Michael or I have said? Okay.
Well, I've got a quick question. So you gave an example of like a chart.
Is how much of a rewrite do we want to do? How much does the council want us to do? And how much of that could be handled in-house with staff that we have, with time that we have in between development review and long-range planning? And how much would have to go to a consultant? Yeah, Bill.
I think that would be more achievable or easier for staff to accomplish if we at least take a first step in getting rid of some of the zones. Like for years we've been talking about taking the pro zones and reclassifying those into the multifamily zones that closest fit them. We could do something to pare down the number of zones. Coming up with that matrix within staff is more achievable. But even that is a big step.
That's a perfect transition. Thanks, Phil. So we have 85 zones in the books. That makes for a pretty confusing zoning map. That makes for a pretty confusing development pattern in the city. 61 of those are residential, or allow a residential component. 38 of those 61, like Bill mentioned, are pro zones. Pro zones, project redevelopment option zones, were a good idea at one point for a specific developer to come up with a specific plan, write a specific zone to get that done. But we now have 38 of them, and it's getting out of hand. We've tried to write the multifamily zones, the LDR, VLDR, NDR, HDR, CNU, as a replacement for those. And we've been pushing developers towards those zones rather than creating their own zones in the past several years. So doing the, yes.
A quick question about the pro zones.
Yeah.
So once those are created for a particular area, are they, do we ever try to apply them to another area or adapt them, or can we just leave them alone?
Very rarely. I've seen that done twice, I think, in the time I've been here, where we've been able to apply a pro zone to a smaller section of the city, but usually they're so specifically written, they're inapplicable to anything else.
But there have been many times where developers want to pursue a pro zone, and we've said, before you would think about that, go through all 36 or 38 of the existing ones, see if any of those are going to work for you, so we can reuse it rather than write another. So we can try.
So we want them to reuse it if possible.
As opposed to writing another new one, yes.
Yes, we don't want bespoke zones for every area of the city.
We'd rather than just use MDR, HDR, or LDR. We'd rather than just use one of those. But if that's not going to work, then try reuse it first.
Okay.
Yeah, and if you look at some of these pro zones, there's so many of them are so close to our multifamily zones with just very minimal changes. Like pro zone 38, I'm acutely aware of. It changed the minimum unit size and the parking requirement. Other than that, it's the DT1 or the ITIL. So they're usually just minor adjustments to the zones that we have to make their project work. So with what Bill was saying, if we could find a way to reduce those, staff went through with council staff to find where we could shrink these down. A lot of these zones, like Michael said, could be combined. We could remove a bunch of them that have never been used, or that have been used once, but will most likely be never be used again. So we could just rezone them, call them legally non-conforming, and everybody would be happy. So we found a way to take it from 85 to 32. So that's one example. That's one example of where we really shrink the code down, make it a lot user-friendly, make it simple for people to understand. Another very glaring red flag situation would be Chapter 1434. If you read the first section of this chapter, initially it was meant to be, these are regulations that apply to every zone in the city. Well, over the years, that hasn't been used that way. We now have 55 sections that apply to different parts of the code, and it's just all over the place. Staff has found a way where we can combine, delete, move those to the relevant zones, and shrink that down to 19 sections. So these are a couple low-hanging fruit, easier things that staff could look at doing with or without a consultant, depending on how the council wants to move forward. Yeah, Michael, anything to add?
No.
Yeah, so next steps, that's you.
Okay, right. Okay, so we've kind of heard a lot from both me and Aaron. So now we'll just go over kind of the next steps in this process here. So we kind of have 3 things that we need to make a decision on today or by the next council meeting. So how are we doing on time right now?
We are doing well.
All right, great. Okay. So
20 minutes.
20 minutes. All right. So we'll go through these steps so you guys can get to your decision making. Okay, so
And who do
decision.
we have online? So we have Travis. Is George online too?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, so
Yes.
Thanks, George.
so decision number one is, are we okay with the scope of work as it is written? That is kind of including everything that I talked about previously during the outline phase, all that that we would kind of bring a consultant on board. They would do a comprehensive cleanup table. They would turn everything into tables. They would kind of give us recommendations on how to modernize our zoning code and also make any changes that will help us to be able to achieve the general plan goals. So
I want to clarify that you and Development Services were on board on developing the scope, correct?
yeah, so the scope of work was jointly approved by both the council and the planning staff.
And Councilor Shipley has a question.
Yeah, I guess as you're saying that, I'm thinking if there are some easy adjustments and deletions and changes, I think we're just making somebody else's job who comes into our, to look at this from the outside even more complicated than it needs to be. If we hire a consultant and they come in and say exactly what you've told us we need to do anyway, it just feels like we're redundant and making more costs. So I guess my question is, are there some simple steps we can take prior to employing someone that might make it easier for the person we employ to sort through this? And I mean, it seems like there should be some easy things we can do before we get to the point of employing.
Right. So it all kind of depends on really what we want to do. Like if we want to strictly just make it easier for staff and developers, then I think probably we could just do I think the staff could probably handle maybe, I don't know exactly, I can't speak for them, but that low hanging fruit that Aaron was talking about, like combining the zones together and doing the deletions and compiling in the title 14.34 is probably something easy that someone could do. Just there is the opportunity, because I think some council members may want to do a more fleshed out rewrite process and look at like setbacks and parking requirements and things that are mentioned in the general plan. So that's kind of where we move to part two of the decision, which would be just saying a motion from the council saying, go forward with this process. And we don't really know, we'll come back to you later to kind of determine what it will look like. Like, will it be a steering committee or full or part-time contractors? Would it be a consulting group? A combination of all that? Like, what could the staff do versus what would we have to bring a consultant on to do? Just all totally depending on how deep that the council wants to go on this. And that kind of leads us also into part three, would be identifying funding source, because kind of the more broad we want it to be, it would obviously affect the cost. And I think Bill has something to say.
In relation to what you just asked, one of the first things we did when we sat down and started talking about this are, what are the things in the code we want to keep? What do we like? What do we think we should hang on to? What do we dislike the most? We have to do something about. So I think we've already started to narrow it down to make it easier for somebody to come in and pick this over.
Councilor Whipple.
Yes, so I like what Dave's talking about. It's like straightening up your house before the house cleaners come so that they don't have to pick up your laundry. They can just scrub things.
Which Bill just said they did.
Yes, which is perfect. But it looks like then there are two different things we're looking at. One is that thorough cleanup of what the existing code and standards are. And then the second thing, which is different, is looking at possibly changing the standards. And that's what we would be doing with the stakeholder group, maybe. Is that what I'm understanding?
Yeah, that's one thing that would be
like
included in that.
Setbacks or minimum lot sizes or things like that to make it more consistent with the general plan. So we have something that's cleaning up what we have now, and the other thing is revising what we have to meet goals. Am I understanding that correctly?
You're right.
Okay, thank you.
Or even introducing new ideas.
Oh, new ideas.
Right.
Woo.
I have a quick question.
I have a question. I'm sorry. All in for George.
Go, George.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you.
I'm just wondering if the opposite of what Dave said is the case. Wouldn't it make sense to just say, why not, if we're going to go with a consultant, why not just hand the whole thing over to them? so that it actually, I don't know, it's in some ways that seems like a cleaner process. I don't know if that saves money necessarily, certainly would save some time. But maybe it's easier for an outside to source that outside and then just have it come back clean.
Michael or Aaron, if you disagree or I'm not getting this right, please correct me. But our analysis of this has been, if we do what you're suggesting, George, we're probably looking at $400,000. If we can pare it down, like Shipley's suggesting, we might be looking more like $200,000. So that was
I'm in favor of saving $200,000. Thank you.
Yeah, I think Bill's totally right with that. Kind of the more we can do on the front end will save us both time and money. When I was kind of reaching out to other cities, they have generally been doing zoning rewrites with their general plan or right afterwards, kind of how we're doing right now. And the zoning rewrite process can take from anywhere from 1 to 2 years. So that's why it's so expensive and it's pretty time intensive as well.
Got it. Thank you.
Councilor Gilmore?
I can certainly understand the motivation for doing this. Aaron makes a great case for cleaning it up, streamlining it for everyone's benefit, council, developers, citizens, etc. The sheer scope of the project, however, is a bit headache inducing, in the sense that it's a major effort. And so I'm curious as to the timeline you perceive for this. But let's say we gave you the green light today. It seems like there are certain sequential things that need to be done. And I'm joking with David here that from a selfish perspective, we hope that you can get all your ducks lined up and hand it off to the new council in January for their review. So anyway, I'm teasing somewhat. So what is the timeline here of this project?
So you're right, Bill, this is very daunting, which is why this has been talked about for years and never.
Nothing's ever been done.
Yeah.
This could be your big move as your
legacy.
Yeah, your legacy as your
Really just dedicate the entire fall.
Yeah, so it's kind of interesting you said that, Councilmember Fillmore, because the kind of the funding source is kind of another that really affects the timing. Because if it's okay, Emily. So if you guys decided to, because right now there's no money appropriated towards this. If we decided to pass a resolution by the council to try and get this included in the FY25 budget, that would obviously push it off until when the budget is passed next year. And in essence, there would be 3 new members of the council that would be either approving or denying that aren't even included in this decision, that may just say, we don't want to do a zoning rewrite at all. So all this is kind of for naught.
Michael, how much funding are you anticipating?
Anywhere from $200,000 to $400,000, probably.
And is that strictly for the consultant or is it for other things?
That's for the consultant, yeah.
Our objective would be to try to pare this down and put it towards that lower end. I'm sorry, Shane.
Councilor Ellsworth.
Yeah, I'm just curious about the staff's capacity right now and for the next 2 years, because I think this will take at least 2 years. And it's kind of a funny situation because with the general plan, it's, yeah, full steam ahead, let's hire a consultant. Let's, get this done. And then the consultant was hired, but then they were taken off of it and the staff did it. And then it took 3 years and we still haven't adopted the conservation resiliency plan. So tell us what's that situation like?
That's a really good point. If we hire a consultant, it still requires considerable staff time to be right there with them, or we make missteps that cause the staff to go back and, redo things. So that's a good point. Right now, interest rates have slowed down applications enough that we finally have a little bit of time to breathe. How long that's going to last, Shannon, I don't know. Right now, the prediction of the economy is going to keep getting stronger. So we may get very busy with development applications again. I think it would be our objective to pare this down enough and to be able to work with a consultant and get it done more expeditiously than the general plan experience you just went through. I don't think any of us think that was a model experience. I think all of us would like to do better than that. That would certainly be a goal.
Okay.
Okay, just going back to the timeline / funding thing. So if we did the FY25 budget, that would push it back until the next year with new council members. Option 2, if you guys wanted to like go right now, let's go for it. Then there's always the option of the legacy CIP fund, which currently there's about $365,000-ish in there. And that may or may not cover all or some of whatever this would cost. It would be dependent upon how much we could pare it down and what the RFP would look like. And then the other option would be to use the general fund balance as well, which, you know, all these options come with their pros and cons as far as timeline and money saving and future budgetary implications. So yeah.
Looking at it, it seems foolish to put that on another council and that delayed the 25 budget. What are the pros and cons of the CIP fund and the general fund? Like, what is the difference between those two that we consider in this decision?
Right. So the legacy CIP fund is essentially the fund that the council had created to be able to use. What was the exact purpose of the legacy CIP fund? John, were you?
Basically, when we set it up, we had CARES Act money that we were setting aside as well as ARPA funds, and so the idea was that the council had specific requests. We had set it up so it wasn't mixed part of the general CIP, so that it would be separate, and we'd be able to track the expenses and kind of see what those balances are.
Okay.
So that was kind of the idea behind it. So I think the biggest question is this the way you want to use, you know, these funds, or does it meet those objectives? But it's definitely there and available.
Yeah, it's essentially like kind of the council's fund account or whatever. You know, some past things that have been used in is there was funds from that was used to purchase the Slate Canyon property and to upgrade the council chambers for the Zoom room option. Some of the plans were funded out of that, so that's kind of one reason. So if you use the money here, like, it'll be gone, but you can't. You know, there will always be something else that you could spend your money on, obviously. So if you all really want this, then that is an instant option right there. And the general fund balance, that just comes with money that we would be taking out of the general fund, So there's a cap at how much we can have in the general fund, which is at 35% fund balance, and we're right at that right now. But I think John will probably talk a little bit more about that in his quarterly report, and that all comes with the zone.
Thank you. Councilor should be the question.
Yep. Can't remember it, sorry.
Okay.
It's okay.
And Councilor Whipple has a question.
Yeah, so I'm curious about something like return on investment for this. Like, what are the benefits that we would get by investing this, like saving in staff time or efficiency? Is there any kind of monetary savings to the city that we would realize, or is this just like our employees would be happier and we won't lose them? Like, what would we get from this?
Well, it will jeopardize staff longevity, because right now this is so convoluted, it makes your planners every place. It's job security. It is. But this will absolutely, I would hope, would really save staff time in our development review. I'm very hopeful and optimistic it would definitely make it easier for the development community and for the rank and file citizens.